All right, this is it.
All right, here we go.
The moment that I've been waiting for quite a while, over 4 years actually. And honestly, a lot of people out there in the old school community have been waiting for it too. Because in the aftermath of 2019 Old School World Championships, I did a deck tech on Daniel Chang's channel on Vintage Magic, where I talked about the games. And obviously there was a lot of news surrounding the event. And in the aftermath of that, a lot of people wanted to see these games. They wanted to see proof of concept and proof of capability rather than what they may have heard on the internet. So this is the finals. I'm there. I'm 8-0 at this point. I've lost a total of 2 games. I lost game 1 of round 1 to a turn 1 Juzam.
Oh boy.
When the guy went turn 1 Juzam, followed up by Sinkhole, then Strip Mine, then Sinkhole. And I had no swords.
Wow.
Hard to win that game.
Yeah.
I beat him the next 2. I won the next game, 2-0. I won the next game, 2-0. I won the next game, 2-0. I got to round 5, and I played against Joel Mick. Joel Mick, who was on the original development team with Richard, a huge guy in the secondary market. And Joel Mick Juzammed me on turn 1.
Wow.
Only this time it was a Suchi.
Wow.
But it was the same.
Yeah.
Turn 1 Suchi, a little while later, copy artifact. I'm chump blocking with factories, and I'm dead in an instant.
Wow.
We go an insanely grindy game 2 that involves a very late time twister that bails him out of trouble. But I'm able to finally grind him down, but we're almost out of time. And we run out of time in game 3, at which point we do a Chaos Orb flip-off.
Oh, wow.
Which is how you resolve ties in Eternal Central Old School. And Joel Mick is an awesome Chaos Orb flipper.
Wow.
He's a great Chaos Orb flipper. He is, I would guess, 95% accurate.
Wow.
Maybe even higher,
Wow.
if he's really in the zone. And that's right about where I am too. I probably screw up about 5% with my old technique. I'm learning new technique, although I don't honestly care that much. But I am learning more technique. And back then I was using the other technique, the one I was more comfortable with, which was probably about 95%. So if you think about a coin flipping match where it flips heads 95% of the time and tails only 5% of the time, and the first person to flip tails loses, it's interesting. It can go really deep. You can get 20 or 30 or 40 flips, which is what happened. And we just kept going. And eventually everyone was crowded around because we were the last match going, basically, because we had run out of time. And we're just flipping and flipping and flipping and flipping and flipping. And it's like 15 minutes go by.
Wow.
And people are like checking their watches and stuff and proposing that we need to raise the altitude.
Wow.
But I'm determined to win.
Yeah.
I need to win this Chaos Orb flip-off because I'm going to be 5-0.
Yeah.
I got to win. I'm not going to miss. I'm just in the zone. Bam, 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 bam. Just like clockwork. But I noticed that with Joel's technique, he has a flaw. He drops the Chaos Orb from one set of fingers to his other finger, and then it rotates. But that's introducing 2 pieces to a simple mechanism. It's fallible. My entire mechanism is just my index finger, really, and just an alignment. So his form is more fallible than mine, and eventually it fails him.
Wow.
He has a super near miss where just clips the corner of the card.
Oh, no.
And then maybe 5-6 flips later, he's done.
Oh, no.
He misses completely. It just bounces at a weird angle and misses, and I win. So then I go on to the final round of the Swiss, where I could just draw in and I play anyway.
Wow.
And I go 2-0.
Wow.
So I'm 6-0.
You got a better seed that way, probably.
Exactly. I wanted to be number 1 seed. It didn't matter. I'm like, yeah, let's just play. Why not?
Yeah.
So we go to the quarterfinals, which we already watched. I take down Eric Froelich in the semis.
Yeah, it's tough.
2-0, 2-0.
Tough.
The deck is humming. The brain is humming. I'm ready to win this tournament.
Yep.
I have put in a ton of work. And this is the prelude to the first game of that final.
And we get to see, which is, it's not a mirror match, but still, Esper.
Esper mirror, right?
Yeah, Esper mirror.
What a way for it to end.
Yeah.
So on the left, weighing in at 175 pounds at the time, probably, the deck.
The deck.
Esper design that I talked about at length in the deck tech before, but to rehash, basically, I decided that I didn't need red, that red did not offer as much as the mana consistency of more black did. I'd rather have 4 underground seas than 2 volcanic islands. You give up the ability to splash red, that's okay. It's just not that important because in this format, you don't fight giant stack battles anymore over mana drain. It's just way more proactive. You don't need red as much. And the only real reason why you miss it is because you can't red blast energy flux. That's what we talked about before. Other than that, it's kind of formulaic to an extent. The rest of the deck writes itself down to a couple of singles, like, do you run balance? Do you sideboard balance? Do you run a main deck fireball? Do you need more than 4 disenchants? Does having a divine offering matter that much? How many tomes? Do you run disrupting scepter? Lots of choices. Do you run 2 abyss? Do you run any moats? There's like all sorts of different choices. Obviously, moats and factory are kind of contraindicated, but you can run them both.
Right.
And outside of that, the deck is pretty stratified. You know, you basically start, when you play control in this format, you start with a predetermined set of cards. Swords to Plowshares, a 4 of. Disenchant, a 4 of. Counterspell, a 4 of. Strip Mine and Factory, a 4 of. A lot of the deck just writes itself. The restricted list is pretty obvious too. It usually comes down to whether or not you run Time Twister. That's usually the only question. And everything else is, predetermined essentially. So there actually isn't a lot of room to navigate the format from a building standpoint, actually. It's very, very solved. This is what ancient solved formats look like. And you're fussing over literally 1 or 2 cards at most ever.
Okay, so is the big difference between these 2 decks the sideboard?
Yes, actually. I think this is really where we're extremely different in terms of how we approached the mirror. How do you prepare for the mirror when you're playing a control deck?
Right.
I can provide a little bit of context using history. There was a card that was ubiquitous in the best deck sideboards back in 1994 and 95. People did not play Felwar Stones back then. And the reason why you didn't play Felwar Stone is because you could literally die by just casting Felwar Stone on turn 2. Your opponent goes Tundra, Underground Sea, and you go turn 2, Felwar Stone. Here you go. And they go Mana Drain Felwar Stone. Untap, play a land, Mind Twist for 4. Just kill you on the spot. You can't allow that kind of stuff to happen. So you couldn't really play with Felwar Stone. And the absence of Felwar Stone from the format made another card incredibly powerful and decisive in the mirror. The card is Mana Short. Mana Short was in the sideboard of original control mirrors. We ran Mana Short and Amnesia. This is a discovery not of my own making, actually. It was invented by a group of guys. I mean, it's so funny, right? Because it seems, by modern sensibilities, it seems extremely obvious. But this is back in the Dark Ages. We're like barely figured out bronze. We just figured out how to make bronze. We don't have anything cooler than bronze yet. And we haven't figured out how to make really hot fires. So you can't make steel or any of that shit yet. So we're like tinkering with bronze at this point. And the bronzesmiths of Stockton and Sacramento, California, John Immerdino and his friend Jim Weaver, mainly, they were the sort of heads of the Brain Trust. And then there were a bunch of other people associated directly with that Brain Trust, including one of the guys is Jesse Powell.
Interesting.
Co-founder of Kraken.com.
That's so
was
interesting.
part of John Immerdino and Jim Weaver's posse.
Interesting.
A quiet kid that just was a good player, but very quiet. While those 2 guys were like the big dominant alphas. I played in an event in probably May or June of 1994, right after I had made the deck had gotten famous. And I played in the finals against Jim Weaver. And we're playing, and I've got my tech, which was Blood Moon.
Yeah.
I had Blood Moon and basic lands back then. And Jim had their tech, Mana Short.
Interesting.
Oh shit, was I scared of Mana Short. Because I kept watching Jim there were all of these other people playing the deck at the tournament. It's like all anybody really played.
Yeah.
And it was just, Jim was murdering people with it.
Wow.
It was so unfair.
Wow.
Because you fight the game-ending counter war at the end of their turn.
Yeah.
You're like, end of your turn, Mana Short. You're looking at your mana like, oh my God, I have an emerald as my land source. It cannot resolve because he's got 7 cards in his hand.
Yeah.
And we've been playing draw go for like 10 turns.
Yeah.
Because everybody has millions of mana drains. Mana Short. Oh my God. I watched him kill people with it left and right the whole tournament, and I was dreading it until we got to the finals. But I beat him anyway. I outplayed him and got Blood Moon locks both games.
Wow.
Well, I think I beat him game 1, and then I Blood Mooned him to death in game 2 and won the tournament. But man, sideboards were everything. Like, how do you sideboard for the control mirror? Back in my day, in 1994, 95, 96, before the Pro Tour, when I literally lived off of Magic. Like, I played for ante. I was a gambler. I roved all around the Bay Area, taking on everybody, and then expanding farther away when other people would drive me. So I would go up to San Rafael and take their first place prize in their weird inbred like hillbilly meta.
Oh no.
Where they had a sign posted on the wall that said, "You are not allowed to channel fireball anyone to death before turn 3.
Oh no. Rule 0. Oh no.
And I'm like, what the hell? What a weird house rule.
Oh, God.
And so I start playing the tournament, and after a little while, it becomes apparent why. There's this guy that just has lore. He's the one good player in this whole place. It was called the Copa Cafe. This guy, and his name was Sin, S-I-N. I still remember our match very vividly.
Wow.
And I was 19 at the time. And so we're talking 30 years ago.
Wow.
And Sin and I sit down to play, and he's really weird and frenetic, and he's playing without sleeves.
Oh, cool.
Which is a statement when you're playing
Well,
in the
his name
back
is
room
Sin,
of
so-
the Copa Cafe.
Oh boy.
Which is like typical greasy, disgusting bar and grill place in San Rafael. And Sin is playing basically Grixis Control with Channel Fireball in his deck for some random reason. And the thing is that Sin is the best player. And in the tournament, I have no idea, but Sin may not have been the most ethical guy.
Oh no.
I can't imagine why I would conclude that when I saw him and looked at, he was covered in, this is not to disparage people with tattoos. My own beloved has one, or many actually, but he looked like a guy that, might skirt the boundaries of propriety. Which means that he might have had more than his fair share of Channel Fireballs.
Oh boy.
Which meant that they passed a house rule. And then the whole meta became Channel Fireball decks. So every deck had Channel Fireball in it.
That's hilarious.
Like the white weenie deck with Channel Fireball in it.
That's crazy.
The land destruction deck, it was like every deck had it. And now it completely made sense. It had like all coalesced around Sin.
Oh my God.
And I handed Sin his ass in 2 games easily.
Jeez.
He could not handle Disrupting Scepter.
Wow.
I just sceptered him to death in both games. He was just befuddled by what to do. How do I play Permission with no cards?
Oh God.
This is extremely hard. Anyway, I don't want to get too into the weeds. That's stories for other times. But what I realized is in this new sort of aggro meta that isn't defined by mana drains anymore, you can be way more proactive. And I'm running all these black sources anyway to support Abyss. And I've got 3 Felwar Stones, which didn't used to be in the deck. They're alternate sources of black. And I've actually got 4 Underground Sea, 4 City Brass, 3 Felwar Stones, a Jet, and a Lotus. This deck has a huge black component in it. And if there's one card in the entire format that control decks hate the most, besides Mind Twist, it's that black creature right there. The Hypnotic Spectre. I tried this slot before in 2018 at Vegas. I went with Hymn to Torak, and a lot of other control players across all the formats across the world have been using hymns. I have not seen people play with Spectres.
I love Hippie. I love Hypnotic Spectre.
Yeah, I do too.
It's such a good feeling when you connect and you're like, gosh, this is great. It flies.
It was
so good.
Terrifying for years. Like, it's the most dangerous creature ever. Turn 1 fucking Ritual Hypnotic Spectre.
Exactly.
Which defined standard format. When Type 2 first became a thing, Ritual Spectre was everywhere. It qualified me for the Pro Tour multiple times. The Hypnotic Spectre is such an insane outlier in power level that it would still be like good in modern day almost.
Yeah, no, seriously, yeah.
It's crazy. It's like such an insane card from Alpha. And I get that Hymn to Torak is great. But when 2 control decks play each other, a lot of the time you hymn the guy and he's like, damn, I discarded a land and a situational card that I have 2 of in my hand already. And you're just black's playing draw go, and pretty soon you're back up to 7 again. The Spectre's like, emphatic, you're dead on turn 1. You don't have a sword, you're dead. Sorry, there's no surviving this. And I realized this. I'm like, it also puts the opponent in a completely impossible position. Because what do they do when it comes to sideboarding? Do they take out Swords to Plowshares and bring in Artifact Kill? And in the case of Jonathan, do they bring in Dust to Dust and Time Elementals or something? And obviously, to make room for those things without sacrificing all the control elements of the deck, you have to take out Creature Kill. You expect that. So you're taking out both your Abysses, and you're taking out all 4 of your Plowshares, because you only saw Factories in the first game. And then they go turn 2 Spectre off a Jet. You just die instantly.
Yeah.
There's no surviving that. Get real. You have like 1 or 2 outs in the whole deck. What are you going to do? Play a time elemental?
Yeah.
And then just like have the mana while the thing is knocking random cards out of your hand and they're strip mining you and stuff to activate time elemental somehow to stay afloat? It's just no way. You just kill them instantly, and you have 4 I win buttons in the deck, and they're extremely castable. So going into this tournament, the Spectres had been wreaking havoc in all of my testing. Nobody could beat them. There was no strategy that could beat the Spectres. They were just literally impossible to beat. People would like bring in, we experimented with like, can you bring in Sarahs to stop them? No. Because the Sarah Angel costs 5 mana.
Yeah.
And the Spectre costs 3.
Yeah.
And it's a lean mana format. You're getting your mana killed all the time at the beginning.
Right.
Spectre's so insane. And if you draw it with the Lotus or the Jet, it's like an automatic win, just about. And sometimes they have the Miracle 1 outer and you just have 2 more.
Yeah.
Which happens. So I'm so confident in the mirror. When I get to the finals, I'm like, I'm going to win this. There's no way after beating Froelich 2-0 that I'm going to lose to anyone in the final. And it's Esper mirror. So I also have Greed in the sideboard. Holy shit, is this card good in the mirror? I've always kind of believed in the card, but one of my good friends, Eric Olofsson, who did very well in the 2018 Old School tournament, I think he made top 4. He's a Swedish guy. He's Grinding Your Games co-founder, and it was our art director, basically. Eric showed up and played Old School against me before the pandemic. He was out here visiting, and he had a control deck that he called Tomeless Control or something. His idea was to use Greed main deck instead of Jamde Tomes. And he learned over our games that it wasn't better. It wasn't really better, but the real reason why I was beating him was because I was just killing the Spectres over and over again.
Yeah.
Every game he would just get utterly routed by Spectres, and he did have Greeds. The Greeds were like kind of even money compared to Jamde Tome. They're obviously less vulnerable, but you can't just spend millions of life. Sometimes you just get beaten down by factories. You take tons of city damage, and then you like can't draw cards now because you're at 7 or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It just doesn't always work out, and so it's not a good main deck card. But it is insane in the sideboard, particularly after your opponent has shifted strategy into more artifact kill.
Right.
Because it can give you this redundancy. You play a Greed at 20. You're like, yeah, I'm going to draw 6 extra cards. Can you deal with that? And that's usually decisive. So moving on to my upcoming opponent, Jonathan Salem's deck. It's Esper also.
Yeah.
Interesting. 2 Esper decks in the finals. We talked about how it's this grand mirror match. And yet Jonathan has gone in some very interesting directions compared to my decisions. A lot of innovation here, actually. I talked a minute ago about how kind of static the format is, about how so much of your card choices are predetermined by the restricted list and by the cards that are the best but not restricted. Cards like Swords to Plowshares, for example. And yet, Jonathan has found a way to totally innovate with the Esper control archetype that's extremely different from my deck in quite a few ways, actually. And I want to kind of go over those right now. So starting in the upper left-hand corner, this is going to be sort of an impromptu deck tech rather than just a strict comparison. Starting in the upper left-hand corner, he has the restricted list, the 5 blue power cards, basically, the real ones that don't include Time Twister. And to the right of that, 4 counterspells is obvious. And then he has 2 copies of Power Sync. What an interesting choice.
Yeah.
So
most
people actually don't know something important about Power Sync. Do you know what's special about Power Sync versus, say, Syncopate?
Power Sync taps all your lands.
Yes. Power Sync taps all your lands. Remember we talked about Mana Short before?
That's right.
Well, I'm going to harken back to a guy named Joel Unger, a guy who was a pioneer and an incredibly brilliant Magic player and deck designer right at the beginning, who kind of dominated the Los Angeles scene, which produced some of the best players of all time, including John Yu, Brian Hacker, Truck Bui, guys who are either in or contenders for the Hall of Fame, all came out of that crucible, out of that meta. And Joel may have been better than all of them. He certainly was at the beginning. I think that they ultimately figured out higher level, deeper things. They certainly figured out tempo and aggro and stuff once it became a big part of the limited Pro Tour. But Joel's original innovations were many. He had a different take on control. My version was artifact based, grind them out. Joel's idea was mana drain something and cast a big-ass creature. So he ran a sort of cadre of singleton big guys. He had a Mahmoudi Jin. He had a Sarah. I don't think he ever played an Ernan, but he definitely played a Dakon Blackblade. He really loved Dakon Blackblade. Yeah, we laugh now, but he killed a lot of people with Dakon Blackblade. It's a big closer.
Yeah.
You know, it comes down as a 10/10 or something. It's like a Legends, it's an Esper Legends creature, right?
Right.
For 6, and it gets +1/+1 for every land you control, I guess. So he would just play Dakon Blackblade and smash people with it. And Joel ran Power Sync, and I didn't. And Joel's entire strategy often was sit around playing the whole waiting attrition game. And then somewhere around like turn 11 or 12, the person would go, I'll cast a Mox Pearl. You know, they just drew it, right? And Joel goes, Power Sync for 9.
Oh, wow.
And this is before people played Fel Wars. So you're screwed, right? What do? Fight a permission war over your Mox? Hell no. Let it resolve? Hell no. That's worse. You get tapped out and he's got 7 cards in his hand. So what the hell do you do? Well, Joel figured this out. He was crushing people with that tech. Salem's got it too. Kudos to him. Very, very good in our matchup, but for one thing, we live in a different environment now where we're not playing draw go forever. Also, a lot of people are running Fel War Stones and stuff. You can let a Power Sync resolve and you can still fight. So it isn't just totally ruinous. You have the Sapphire also and maybe the Lotus. So you have these other alternate sources that don't get tapped by Power Sync. I think it weakens the card a lot. But it's not a bad card in any control deck. And enough situations will often present themselves that Power Sync still can shine. And clearly here it is. It's shining in the finals, right? I don't know that Jonathan has Power Sync in his deck, though. We haven't seen each other's deck lists. So he can play it at a time where it catches me, seriously, really off guard and kind of Joel Ungers me to death. So it's a risk. I don't know it at the time, obviously. So moving on from there, we've got Demonic Tutor. It's obvious. He has the same 2 Abyss that I'm playing with, and of course, Mind Twist. With it looks like a beta picture. 4 Swords to Plowshares, 4 Disenchants, all obligatory. He's got Chaos Orb as well, which of course is mandatory in the format. And then he's got a Scepter. Talk about a blast from the past.
Right.
How cool and kind of ironic is this? That I'm in the finals of the Old School World Championship and the only guy playing with a Disrupting Scepter is my opponent. Because I was known for that card.
Yeah.
I made Disrupting Scepter objectively famous. Everybody played Disrupting Scepter for years because it was such a weapon in the weird mana drain meta. In modern Old School, it's not honestly that good. I don't think it's main deckable. My testing never validated it being that good. My good friend Nate Prodzik, who is a brilliant player and deck designer also, who really understands old school formats, eternal formats, like Old School and EDH, competitive EDH, he swears by Scepter in the main deck still. I'm not sold because I think that Nate has played too many games of mirror against me rather than playing against the whole field. You really don't like Disrupting Scepter in round 1 against Goblins or Mono Black. It's like, it's so horrible against those decks that you would literally just do anything but pay 3 to make them discard an inconsequential card. Where you let your guard down, it's like, it doesn't make any sense. So I don't think the card deserves to be main deckable. I do think it's a worthy sideboard card, but then it's like, what are you going to play? A Scepter or these dudes over here? Which one would you rather have in play? In the control mirror in game 2, Disrupting Scepter or Hypnotic Spectre?
Right.
Not hard to decide, right? Yes, you can cast the Scepter a little bit easier, but then it just dies. Like it's a mid to late game card. Whereas the Spectres, you can just ram them instantly and win. So Salem has a Scepter. I don't know that he does, but it does give him a little bit of an advantage in game 1, I think. And then to the right of that, we get to mana. Oh, I'm sorry. Actually, we're not at mana yet. He organized the deck a little bit interesting. So below the Swords to Plowshares area, he has the same amount of tomes as me. And then he has something that I have literally never ever seen before in a top tier control deck. The Hive.
Yeah, I remember the Hive. I used to have a Hive in my old collection of Magic cards. Very cool.
Very cool card.
Yeah, I love the design of the card.
Very flavorful.
Yeah.
In fact, I remember it was one of the first rares that I saw after I've been playing the game. Like, I got Royal Assassin in my first starter deck.
That's a great card.
Unlimited. I bought 2 unlimited starter decks on the day I was introduced to Magic. I think I should probably know this date. It's like middle of January 1994 at a friend's birthday party. And as an aftermath of seeing the game, being bored by my friends playing the game, trying to figure out the rules while I wanted to do other things, eventually just acceding to try it, winning my first game and being instantly addicted for the rest of my life, I went and bought 2 unlimited starter decks, and I got a Royal Assassin, which at the time was sort of side by side with Shivan Dragon as the ultimate chase rare in Magic.
Right. Yeah.
And I loved Royal Assassin. And then one day I saw the Hive, and I was more in love with the Hive for some reason. I don't know why.
That's funny.
But I was looking at it like, wow, think of the possibilities. The games were really long back then.
Yeah.
If you both managed to draw mana, the games tended to go really long because they're just super grindy, and the Hive seemed way better than Royal Assassin.
Yeah.
Because it's like a 1/1 versus an infinite stream of artifact flyers.
Right.
So the card had its time, but it hasn't been in any, honestly, top tier, S tier construction since time immemorial. I certainly never used it. And yet, here in the finals, Jonathan has 2 of them.
It dodges the abyss.
It's baffling, right?
Yeah.
I have to give him credit, honestly. I really do, even though I'm baffled by it. And all my instincts say it's wrong. Like, why would you play a Hive over another Jam Day Tome? When is Hive better than Jam Day Tome?
Yeah.
Jam Day Tome costs 1 less. And every time you tap it, you deal 4 damage to the opponent. Whereas Hive costs 5, and you've paid 10 mana for a 1/1.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, he has 2 of them in his main deck. They're obviously working. Does he understand something about this format that I don't know? Did he see something that I don't know? Hard to say, right?
Yeah.
But here we are both in the finals. And this is the biggest difference, clearly.
Yeah.
I'm planning to just win with factories and determinism. And Jonathan has an alternate strategy. He's like, I'm just going to ram a Hive early, I guess, against a control player. And I'm just going to grind you down with it. Because you spent disenchant screwing around on Moxes and stuff like a normal player. And I'm just going to play this thing that makes 1/1s. Yeah, you might be able to like swords the 4th and the 5th one to slow it down, but you're going to die. Oh, you got lucky and got your fireball and you killed 3 of them? For whatever that is, 3, it's 7 mana.
Yeah.
Right? For 7 mana, you killed 3 of them. Guess what, buddy? There's 4 more.
Right.
And now there's 5 and there's 6. Like, it could definitely win in the mirror, for sure. It could be very powerful and effective. You could use it to take down a Serendipity or something. It just, instinctively, it seems worse than Jam Day Tome to me. At least as a 4 of, and then you've got like the Scepter slot. Because at the end of the day, you just win by controlling the game for a while. And then it doesn't matter what your win condition is.
Right.
We all kind of know that. But Jonathan has defied expectations. It may be very impactful in our final match.
Okay, let's take a look at the mana right now. Can you explain this for us, Brian?
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward, to be honest. With the exception of Felwar Stones and some other jewelry, Jonathan's basically using the same amount of mana that I am, -1. But he's gone in a really interesting direction. Normally, this archetype wants to run the 4 copies of City of Brass. But instead of running City of Brass, he's actually just running Scrublands instead. He's running Scrublands instead and only 2 Cities of Brass, which saves him. It's really, really interesting because if you look at Jonathan's deck, and one of my impressions about this deck was that it's very, very vulnerable to aggro. He's actually running 1 fewer Mishra's Factory even, which makes him even more vulnerable to aggro because those things they're your moat in this format. The factories are really how you shore up your defense in the early game. They die a lot, but they draw a lot of fire, and sometimes they just sit there and your opponent can't attack you with anything that doesn't fly. They're really incredibly powerful, and Jonathan's only playing 3 of them, which means that he's making other mana concessions to not run the full set of factories. And he's only running 2 City of Brass as well. And my feeling about this is that Jonathan understands how vulnerable he is to aggro, which makes 4 City of Brass way harder to abide. You're taking all this extra incidental damage for, honestly, not a consistent benefit. And the cost-benefit analysis of that is that it's better to actually only run 2 if you can get away with it, because it makes you better against aggro when you're not taking all this extra damage. And Jonathan's determined that he doesn't need those extra Cities of Brass to consistently cast counterspells and stuff. So he can run Scrublands instead, which are just more stable. And he's gone in the 0 Felwar Stone direction. The jury is still out about that, honestly. We talked about this before.
Right.
And instinctively for me, I think Felwar Stones belong in strip mine formats. And they don't belong in the no strip mine formats. So, for example, when people have come to me and asked me to build them versions of this Esper design from Vegas for their format, their own personal format, it might be Pacific, it might be Atlantic, it might be Swedish, might be Italian or Paladins. I built versions of this in all those formats. And I never wind up putting Fellwar Stones in the deck. It just doesn't feel like any reason to do it. It doesn't really make the deck better. Because there's just nothing to do fast, really. Particularly not in the control mirror. In the control mirror, you're not jamming a Jam-Day Tome on turn 3. It's not a recipe for success.
No.
Most of the time. Every now and then you get really lucky and it works out. But a lot of the time you get fucking destroyed for doing that in one way or another. To be blunt, you tap out for a tome for some reason. And they go, oh, that's nice. I'll disenchant at the end of the turn and mind twist your hand away. Or Time Walk Ancestral. And you're just like, oh, Jesus, why did I tap out for a tome? So stupid. Every now and then it works out. Most of the time you get horribly punished. So people understand that. So Jonathan has decided not to use any Fellwar Stones. It has advantages and disadvantages, obviously. And this is sort of one of, I think, if there is an enigma that still pervades old school, it's a very solved format. It's the Fellwar question in control decks. It's like Team Fellwar and Team No Fellwar. For me, what would you call Team No Fellwar? Just Team Land?
Oh, gosh. Yeah, probably like Team... I don't know. Yeah, probably Team Land.
Honestly, Team 1994. Because we sure as hell did not run Fellwar Stones for a while. I ran them in this... Oh, were you suggesting?
I was like Team Dirt, Team Ground.
Yeah, Team Land, Team Terra. I ran them eventually in a deck. It came to be called The Rock.
Oh.
R-O-C.
Oh.
Because I ran Rock of Kiriges in it.
Oh, that's right.
And Phantom Monsters, oddly enough. These malign, shitty creatures. Because the whole point of the deck was basically to make a point. It doesn't matter how dopey your creatures are. If you run out Jam-Day Tomes fast and you power them with Fellwar Stones, you can just win the game. And that's what the deck was. It was a tome deck. Like a churning Jeskai tome deck that ran these dopey 3/3 flyers. I won the biggest tournament at Costa Mesa, California with that deck the one time I played it there. I just showed up, and this is like the battleground where all the LA guys played, all the best guys, the guys who were in the Hall of Fame. And I showed up with the Rock, and I just smoked everyone with it.
Wow.
This ridiculous deck where I'm like double blocking a Serendib in the finals.
Wow.
Because the thing is, it's like most of them didn't understand what mattered. Not that they wouldn't kill Jam-Day Tome, but like just the tempo. It was a tempo deck.
Yeah.
Jeskai tempo deck. It ran 4 Mana Drain, of course, and I was just abusing the shit out of that card. Mana Drain and play a Phantom Monster, dude. What do you do? There's no answer. Anyway, so getting back to this design. We're going to look at the rest of the mana here. So Jonathan's running 2 Cities of Brass. He has a really stable mana base, and he's not running Fellwar Stone, which means that I can't disenchant his Fellwar Stones to get openings in the game. And he's not even running the full Mox set, honestly.
Yeah, there's no Ruby, there's no Emerald.
No Ruby and no Emerald. Wow, way to buck the trends. Jonathan, seriously. I mean, I really like it. The fact that he's undefeated in the finals. The fact that he's undefeated in the finals means that he figured a lot of cool shit out that was clearly off my radar, because I haven't made a control deck without 5 Moxes since I didn't have 5 Moxes. They were already restricted by the time I had all 5. And of course they went into every deck forever because they're just totally insane broken cards. Even the Emerald and the Ruby are insanely broken. You can just watch LSV draft Vintage Draft. Online, Vintage Cube. He'll take an off-color Mox over almost anything. The card is completely insane. You just break all the rules of the game. And so eschewing 2 of those Mox effects, even though you don't have a red or a green spell, it's interesting. But he's in the finals. How can I argue? It clearly works well. And he's figured something else out. So moving across the lands, 4 Tundra, 4 Underground Sea, 3 Scrubland, tons of black mana. Really set up, honestly, to play black spells on the sideboard, which he has only 1 of, which we'll get to in a second. And then he's got 4 basic islands. 4 basic islands, which he's able to play because he doesn't have to run Fellwars. He can run basic land, which solves entirely the Blood Moon problem. I believe that's 4 basic islands. It's possible there's a plains in there, actually.
Yeah, maybe.
I can't really tell because of the glare. If you look right here, that's Tundra, 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 and then there's these like 2 lands here.
And that's definitely an island.
That's an island, that's an island. It's possible there's a plains in there, and honestly, I'd be shocked if he doesn't have a basic plains.
Yeah.
Because he has a ton of double white in the sideboard, 3 Wrath of God, 2 Dust to Dust in the sideboard, and an Archivian Archaeologist. That's some cool old school tech there. He's got tons of double whites in the sideboard, which really makes me suspect that he's got to have at least one basic plains. Because you can blue elemental blast all day, but the guy that plays Blood Moon against you, that guy might have 2 or 3 red blasts in his hand too, and you might just be dead on the spot. Even though because you can't cast white spells, what the hell are you supposed to do, right? So based on that, you kind of need access to plains, and you've got your Pearl too, just to have more outs if Blood Moon comes down. So I suspect that he does have a plains in there. I would be shocked if he doesn't have one. So that's the full deck. He has 30 mana sources. He has a lot of the same cards as me, actually. He has finishers, genuine finishers in the form of these 2 hives. He only is running 3 Mishra's Factories. And then other than that, we're very, very similar. And I have some advantages against him. I have a Divine Offering, whereas he has only 4 Disenchants. And he has advantages against me. He has a Scepter where I have a Fireball or a Balance. And the decks are different. They're similar. It's really going to come down to sideboard and play skill, of course, which is almost always the biggest decider in this format anyway.
Right.
Over in Jonathan's sideboard, I'm going to talk about that right now. I'm going to start from top to bottom. So he's run 3 blue elemental blasts versus 4. What do you think about that, Sam?
Yeah, maybe because of the power things, he doesn't feel like he needs, another counterspell, or he feels like pretty protected against red. So I don't know. Yeah, he feels good about it.
Yeah, it is interesting to me. All I can conclude, honestly, given the fact that he does not have a Circle Protection red, not even one in the sideboard, and he's only running 3 blue elemental blasts, and he only has 3 Mishra's Factories, that Jonathan is just hedging strong against non-aggro opponents, specifically not against red. He's just assuming that if he fights red, he's just going to just draw high variance against it, I suppose. Just draw the restricted list and win that way. He does have Wrath of God in the sideboard, but Wrath of God is really not an answer to the good red decks, like the one that Athena played. Athena Froelich, Eric's wife, who was my opponent in round 4, ran an excellent version of Goblins, which was like just the right mixture of aggro creatures, direct damage, and artifact damage. And it's a very tough puzzle to solve because you don't have a lot of time, and you need to draw the right answers at the right time. And Wrath of God is not an answer to that deck. It does not solve any of the problems. Blue Elemental Blast does. Life Gain does. Factory can by itself. So he's clearly, and of course Circle Protection red can. So he's clearly hedging that he's not going to play against aggro decks. He's basically hoping that he doesn't hit one early in the first couple rounds, and by the time that he gets further along in the tournament and the opponents get harder, all of the mono red decks are gone from the field, which didn't work out because Athena was, she may have finished 4-2, but she was 4-0 or 3-0 at one point. So he could have hit her, midway through the tournament. And he has no access to Circle Protection red. And I was so worried about losing to one of those Goblin decks because I knew I was not favored in game 1, no matter how well I played, that I needed to make sure I could not lose games 2 and 3. So I ran with 2 COP red. He's got 0. But it's going to be a huge advantage in the finals if he has the cards in his sideboard instead. So moving on to Time Elemental. I don't think those are actually Time Elementals now when I think about it. I know that we were maybe maligning them unfairly earlier, and now I feel foolish. And I'm sure the old school aficionados, I'm so glad I remembered this, because otherwise I'd seem like a total idiot. But they're misprints.
Yeah, I figured that.
Okay, thank God. Thank God I remember that. They're like, Weissman knows nothing. He's making fun of Jonathan for having Time Elementals in his deck, and they're actually Sarah's. Okay, I take it all back. He has Sarah Angels. Obviously, those are meant for me. He's kind of doing the same switcheroo. He's intending to bring them in, and they're actually good against some like mid-range aggro decks too, because they block and kill Serendipity Freaks and stuff while still attacking. And I ran them back in the day anyway, but they're not as strong as Hypnotics. The fact that he has 2 of them though means that he has to keep me on my toes. Can I take out all 4 sorts of plowshares? Maybe I can only take out 2 because you don't want to die to a Sarah. So I think that's what those are. He also has a very similar kind of threat in the form of the Guardian Beast. So if he plays a Guardian Beast, the game gets really, really hard for me if I have no plowshares. So these are definitely Jonathan's versions of my Spectres, unequivocally. And they're great. I think they're excellent choices, all 3 of them. However, getting back to that central point, they cost 4 and 5 mana. And if you can accomplish kind of the same thing in a more proactive way for 3 mana, it's probably better. Plus, the Spectres are good against other decks too that you would never anticipate. For example, I played some games against Edwin. Edwin the Magic Engineer.
Yeah.
He was playing his Stasis deck. The Stasis deck that he worked on like 6 iterations of it or something. He kept making videos about it. And Daniel Chang organized this big showdown at Vegas in, I think, 2018. I believe it was 2018. And by 2019, he was done with the Stasis decks and he was playing a more kind of aggro direct thing. But he was working on this Stasis deck, and he and I play against each other. And I have Hypnotic Spectres against Stasis. It's very awkward, very inconvenient. When I tested, in retrospect, and Edwin could certainly correct me about this, but maybe I only had hymns then when we played, but I kept testing against Stasis decks because they were in the meta, and Edwin seemed to be certain that they were good. He was having good success with them. So whenever I had switched over to Spectres and I'm playing Stasis, it's like, what the hell does he do? Just cast the Stasis to stop the Spectre? You know what I mean? It's not a strategy. Howling Mine, like, offset the Spectre. They were so devastating in all those games too. So where these Sarah and Guardian Beast are much more specialized for the mirror, the Spectres are flexible. They're good against blue-red too, actually, against that counterburn deck. Because you can just run them out there and protect them with blue blast. The guy's like drawing counterspells while he's getting hit by a Spectre. Even though you'd think he'd be able to kill him, but they take bolts and stuff out. And they get vulnerable to the Spectres in the same way. They're so amazing.
Yeah.
If you're an old school guy out there, try them out.
Yeah.
tell him Brian Weissman sent you. Anyway, moving on to the white cards, we've got Argivian Archaeologist, right? Argivian Archaeologist was a card that we ran in the original The Deck. The original one, the one that was called The Deck first. This deck that my friend Matt played at DungeonCon. Or, no, it wasn't DungeonCon, Manifest. In 1994, it was like May. And he went there to represent our brain trust. And in our deck, we had one copy of Argivian Archaeologist. Because it was just so delightful to just enter that weird sub-game where you could orb them every turn. And it was surprisingly good. Like, it just mattered in so many games. But eventually it got kind of phased out once we got more serious about the game. But there was a time when the Argivian Archaeologist was baller. And it's awesome to see that it's in Jonathan's sideboard. What do you do when you have no Sword Splashers and the guy's an archaeologist? You can't kill any of his tomes. Yeah. It's good tech, honestly. It's really cool tech. I've never thought of it before. But for the mirror, it is strong as hell. It's just like he's going in a different direction. So he's got those 4 slots covered in the same way that I have 4 Spectres. And maybe he's right. He's in the finals. So 2 Dust to Dust after that, which is interesting. He has no Divine Offering at all. And I respect Divine Offering so much that I'm now running 4 of them in my current design of this deck. 1 main deck, 3 in the sideboard now. That's how good that card is in old school. I think it's obligatory that you run with access to at least 3 of them, if not 4. And yet, Jonathan has 2 copies of Dust to Dust. So this decision to me is probably the one that I'm just like the most stunned by, honestly. Because I respect the hell out of Divine Offering so much. The life gain is so good. It's so incredibly powerful against the decks where you really want life gain, the guys that are vicing you and anking you. And you only need to look at my game against Frolic, right? That main deck Divine Offering gained me 4 life.
Right.
And I ended the game at 1.
Yeah.
I ended the game at 1. I got 4 life from it. I cast it twice and I plowshared my own creature, right?
Right.
To gain life that game. Insanely consequential. Having access to it. And then against the decks you really want artifact kill against urgently, where disenchants alone are not enough, Divine Offering is the card you want. Dust to Dust costs double white also, in a format where people strip mine you all over the place. They target your white lands, and now you're just drawing like colorless lands and underground seas, and you draw 2 Dust to Dusts in a row, and there's a Vice out. And you know you're dead. You're just going to sit around and die now. Because you're playing with a card that sometimes, like 5 to 10% of the time, against certain matchups is better. And there's the factory issue. The format is awash in Mishra's factories. They're everywhere. So, you know what kills factory really well? Divine Offering does. It just, this makes no sense to me. The card was so bad that it was the card that I cut to play with the second COP red in my sideboard. I'm like, I get that it's value, but honestly, this card just underperforms every time I play it. And then when I published the deck list later, as you know, I switched the Divine Offering back, the the Dust to Dust back in because it was all I had with me. Obviously, I think in my mind, I'd already decided that Divine Offering was better for the slot, but it was all I had with me, and it was better than fucking Cop Red. So that was the version that I made public. Anyway, he's running 2 Dust to Dust. I do not agree. I think this card is garbage. Hot garbage in Modern Old School. It may have had its time years ago, but I do not think it belongs in decks anymore. 3 Wrath of God. Strange choice. 3 of them. 3 of them. You notice
all those aggro decks.
You notice I play 1, so I guess that's the idea. But the problem is you don't loot. The aggro decks don't kill you with creatures. They kill you with artifacts and burn usually. And a lot of the time you don't have time to even Dust to Dust anything. You can't gain life. I run 1 copy of the card because it's kind of a catch-all against the mono black deck that might overextend or something. People try to outrun the Abyss. So a full 3 copies of Wrath of God. He certainly respects the vulnerability to aggro. And he's hedging against control. So this is his 2 COP red for sure.
Yeah.
The exact same mentality in a nutshell, right? It's like I know that I'm really, really not favored in game 1 against red and against just aggro strategies in general, like mono black or something.
Right.
You know, where they're like ritual, jet, double order Leapbore on turn 1. Or sorry, order the Ebon Hand.
Right.
Like what the hell do you do against that? You got one of your 2 abysses or you die.
Yeah.
Right. At least I've got balance and fireball. I have contingencies outside the Chaos Orb, right? So you got to just be prepared for everything. And I have factories too, which can save you. You can get 2 of them out and deal with it, kind of. You know what I mean? So he's got Wrath of God as his solution card, and I think that it covers some bases, but it leaves a number of other bases very vulnerable. And I definitely don't think 3 is the right number. Anyway, moving on to Ivory Tower. He and I completely agree.
Yeah.
And then we move to City in a Bottle. Very interesting card that he's got, and this is one place where he's rewarded for only playing 2 Cities of Brass instead of 4. Whether or not he would bring in City in a Bottle against me, hard to say, because it's like, is it worth it? What if he draws 2 Cities of Brass, and then he draws City in a Bottle, and I have no Cities of Brass? It's not really good then.
Yeah.
Not good at all, in fact. And in a match that I played against Menendian that Daniel recorded, I talked about it before, he had City in a Bottle in play, and he could not play his own City of Brass. He's totally screwed by it. So it does happen. I think the card is like insane when you draw it at the right time, and there's definitely decks that you'd want that against. You'd certainly would want it against, Jin.deck. deck. 4 Juzam, 4 Urnam, 4 Serendip, good stuff, basically. You'd just obliterate them with it. You want like 11 copies of it instead of 1. But I think against me, it doesn't have a place. So it's a dead card, at least in the mirror. And then finally, the Disrupting Scepter, of course, which could bring him up to 2. And of course, it's going to come in 100%. We end with the Disrupting Scepter, right, which we discussed already. And that's Jonathan's 75 cards. This is what has got him to this point against me in the finals. We're both 8-0.
That's pretty cool.
Imagine that. That's really cool.
That's really cool.
Really cool. I don't honestly know anything about Jonathan. I'm sorry, but I had no idea who he was. He's clearly a master of the format. Going 8-0 in an event of that magnitude with that many good players in it is incredibly impressive. Totally impressive.
Yeah.
And the fact that he's 8-0, I couldn't have asked for a better opponent other than maybe Eric.
Yeah.
But I got past Eric in the semis. So it's me versus Jonathan in the finals. Best of 3 with the 2019 Old School Magic the Gathering World Championships on the line. Coming up next will be Game 1, guys. It is a doozy. Be prepared for that. Sam, thank you so much for joining me for the commentary. I can't wait to cover Game 1 of the finals, and we'll see you over there. Thanks for watching.